strong debate. Oh, I hope you could hear me. Yes? Okay. Well, then, once I apologized, and really sorry, I would like to welcome all of you to the European Ceramic Days, organized by the European Parliament Ceramics Forum. At last, and after almost 200 years of pandemic, we can hold this event in person, and we can discuss and propose measures for the competitiveness of the sector face to face. First of all, let me thank Ceramica for their tireless effort to set this conference up and for their tireless work to be in the voice of the sector, in the heart of the European Union, and certainly for having supported me and shared with me these 6 years in the presidency of the ceramics industry forum. Thank you very much, Renaud. Thank you, Ines. I don't see you where you are. Well, in any case, thank you very much, Ines. And thank you, Leo, for all your commitment. As you well know, the European Parliament Ceramic Forum is a discussion group created in 1994 to facilitate dialogue between the European institutions and the ceramic industry on all relevant policy developments. The forum is composed of members of the European Parliament, ceramic industry decision makers, and representatives of European trade unions. The European Commission, for this part, always attends ad hoc events organized by the EPCF, and I truly appreciate its involvement and support. As President of the European Parliament Ceramics Forum since 2016, I have had the opportunity to chair and attend several meetings of the forum, which usually take place during the Ceramic Days in mid-November, as today. Last year, trade was one of the key topics discussed, and we were pleased to welcome Chief Trade Enforcement Officer, Mr. Redonnet, from the European Commission, and INTA Chair, Mr. Lange, and INTA Vice President, Mrs. Vedrem, from the European Parliament as speakers. This year, the European Parliament Ceramics Forum will again bring together high-level panels on decarbonization and sustainable financing, and we will be able to count on Mette Quinn, Deputy Director of DG CLIMA, and Mr. Anuskevicius, Policy Officer of DG CROW. This is a momentous time for European industry. We know that we are facing major challenges, such as rising energy prices, speculation in the emissions trading market, and exorbitant freight rates in shipping. This is a great concern to me, and it is leading to a loss of competitiveness in companies, which may end up affecting employment. That is why we must do everything we can to work with the European Commission and Parliament to improve upcoming legislation, such as the emissions trading market. The Fit for 55 package is key to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. However, this goal has to be achieved without leaving anyone behind and facilitating the transformation of the industry in order to be more globally competitive. The ceramic sectors must provide the European Commission with analysis based on objective data so that it takes on board the industry's demands, as has happened in the conflicts over illegal tariff practice in Egypt or Saudi Arabia. As the sector is well aware, and thanks to the negotiations with DG CLIMA, we have been able to learn that the creation of the CBAM will not affect the ceramic sector. I think this is a very important point. I can remember, how many meetings we held in order to try to achieve this and to convince the Commission what important was this issue. And I think this is important because it provides legal certainty when it comes to setting the objectives and key points on which the sector must act. We must be vigilant and bring to the attention of the European Parliament and the Commission any distortion that may be by the new Fit for 55 legislation. We must be clear that there is no planet B and that we must work to reduce emissions from the sector to meet the 55% emission reduction targets for 2030. We will work for a just transition and for the European Union to support its productive sectors, such as ceramics, to be more sustainable and to be more competitive. The European Union's new industrial strategy is very successful, and I think it is great news for European industry. Reciprocity is without any doubt one of the most successful points and one that we have always defended. That is why I arrived late, because we are agreeing a new regulation on IPI that is a very important legal instrument in order to ensure a more level playing field. Our companies must play on a level playing field so that international competitors must meet our same standards also. We note with concern that in the current and future context, investment by the ceramics industry will be totally conditioned by the degree of compliance with the Green Pact. The high cost of cash and the price of emissions rights will prevent surpluses from being used for the ceramic industry's energy transition. In this regard, the European Commission should investigate the current carbon price escalations. There is a high risk of speculation and anti-competitive behavior in the carbon market, and its surveillance should be strengthened. To avoid such situations in the future, the European Commission should also study and propose changes to avoid extreme carbon price fluctuations in advance. Ceramics represents 10% of the industry subject to carbon allowances, but is responsible for only 1% of EU emissions, as all of you know very well. Me too. For the ceramics sector, it will be virtually impossible for emitting companies to have sufficient capital left over for investments in the decarbonization of the industry in a context such as the current one, with gas prices above 100 euros MWH and CO2 at 60 euros. There may even be insufficient funds for current investments, which will result in a decline in energy efficiency. From the European Parliament, MEP Elisabetta Gualmini and myself, both belonging to the S&D group and fully commitment with this sector, have requested meetings with DG Economy and Employment and Competition to address these challenges for the present and future of sustainable financing. As you well know, we have already sat down with DG Climate to address the reform of the ETS and explain with data the needs and challenges of the ceramics industry in order to make a proper transition to climate neutrality. The EU must ensure the financing of green transition investments for those emitting sectors that do not have an automatic energy transition, that are threatened by energy costs and within green taxations and the ETS, as the ceramic sectors faced. The ceramic industry is a world leader and a key sector for the EU economy, providing more than 200,000 direct jobs and representing more than 27 billion euros in production value, and it must remain so. The renovation wave project and the reconstruction plan are two opportunities for the sector, and the European Union must encourage this. By working together, we will all be better, and we all be more powerful. This is what I really wanted to tell you today. This is a short message. I hope that tonight we'll have the opportunity to speak each other and to have very good meeting among all of us and very good time for sharing our challenges, our opportunities, and above all, our friendship. Thank you very much for attention.
Thanks, Immaculada. Hope you can hear me. Good afternoon and welcome to this first panel discussion of the European Parliament Ceramics Forum 2021, which for I think the second time is not actually happening in the European Parliament. My name is Frédéric Simon. I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of Euractiv.com. We're an online media specialized in EU affairs, and I will be your host for today's event discussion as part of this year's Ceramics Forum. Now, today's topic, Fit for 55, how can it support the decarbonization of industry, as the name suggests, is how to decarbonize the ceramics industry. And with ceramics, as you all know, we're looking at a very particular sector, indeed, because it is made up mostly of SMEs and small emitters, which together represent around 1% of Europe's total emissions. So what is the best policy mix to tackle a sector like this, composed mainly of SMEs? To discuss this topic today, I'm very pleased to welcome Mrs. Mette Quinn, sitting there to my right. She's head of unit at the European Commission's Climate Directorate in charge of the implementation of the EU's emissions trading scheme. Elisabetta Gualmini will be joining us online. She's an Italian MEP from the Socialist and Democrats group in the European Parliament. She drafted a resolution last year on the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, and we'll talk a bit further about this. Next up will be Peter Liese, a German MEP and rapporteur on the ETS revision in the European Parliament. He's from the centre-right European People's Party. He will be joining us online at 15:45. He will have to leave very soon after, and so we'll try, if possible, to squeeze maybe a question or two with him. Next up will be Alexandr Vondra. He's a Czech MEP from the conservative ECR group in Parliament, and he is shadow rapporteur on the ETS revision. He will be also joining online. And finally, we will turn to Emilio Mussini. He's the gentleman sitting there on my left. He's chairman of the Panaria Group, a ceramics company with plants in Italy, Portugal, and the US. And he will be speaking on behalf of the ceramics industry today. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us. We'll start with presentations from each of the speakers lasting around 10-15 minutes maximum, and then we'll turn to a Q&A session that will also include questions from the audience. You will see soon behind me a screen with a QR code and the address of a website where you can register on the Slido platform, where you can answer an online poll and also put your questions to the speakers. So if you can take a few minutes to look at those questions, we'll then start the discussion by looking at the results of this poll. Last remark before we start, as you've noticed, Mr. Mussini has live interpretation going on, so there will be a slight delay in the answers. So please take that into consideration. I think that's all for me for the introduction. So without further ado, Mrs. Mette Quinn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the Ceramics Forum today. It's also my first event for more than a year and a half in person, and it's extremely nice to be together with all of you again. It has been a very long time online, so good to see people in person again. I would like to present the Fit for 55 package, but mainly focus on the emission trading system, which is, of course, of very high importance for you in the ceramics sector. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, this is from, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I wanted to start by stepping one step back to the European climate law to remind ourselves that our leaders have agreed to put in law the decarbonization goal for 2050 to European law. And in order to reach that in an orderly manner, we have set ourselves the target of reaching at least 55% net greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030. So the Fit for 55 package is basically a big element of implementing the European climate law, a proposal for how to do that in a very cost-efficient manner. There will be a few other proposals added a little bit later in this year. So focusing on the revision on the EU ETS and the overall Green Deal. We need, and we have seen this from our impact assessment and our analysis, we need transformation clearly across the whole economy, across all sectors. And one of the very efficient ways of achieving the transformation and supporting it is through carbon pricing. It's the most cost-effective manner. But it does not address all barriers, so we have in the overall package of proposals a combination of emission trading, carbon pricing also through taxes, targets, regulation and standards. So we see we need a good mix of the various different types of measures in order to reach our objective. We also think it is important that national governments are still also accountable in certain sectors. We know we have mainly for the ETS sectors, we have European level legislation, but we want to keep national legislation on road, transport and buildings and what we have in the effort sharing regulation. So this is maintained. We also have a review on the energy taxation directive, and this is important that it focuses on the energy content and not of the emissions, so these are complementary. Yeah. Then what is important and what was also mentioned is, of course, we have a new carbon leakage protection measure put in up for proposal, the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. It's not going to be so relevant for the ceramic sector, so I will not focus on that, but stay with the ETS. So if we look at the ETS sorry, it's the other way. Yes, sorry. If we look at the ETS over the past years, we see on the graph on the right that the allowances that we have issued, so that's the annual cap, has been higher than the line all the time. So we have the emissions, the real emissions is the line. So the policy is still, I mean, it's not one that is super tight yet, and you can see also for the next 3 years with the ETS as it is, we have still a little bit of a buffer in the sectors. The market stability was introduced because we had a very low price, and this was also what industry was asking for. We need a price that incentivizes us to decarbonize. With the market stability reserve, you can see we have removed or we have not issued so many allowances in order to gradually reduce the oversupply in the system. It has worked well. We have had good emission reductions from the sectors covered by the ETS, and the carbon price have increased, in particular since 2018, when we had the agreement on the post-2020 carbon ETS. So what are we proposing now? We are proposing to strengthening. So the cap, in order to be aligned with the reduction target of minus 55%, needs to be tightened. And we also need to increase the annual reduction, the so-called linear reduction factor. And in order to take into account that we need to reach minus 55% in 2030, we propose to increase the linear reduction factor from 2.2 to 4.2% and have a one-off reduction of 117 million in the current ETS sectors. If we take a very long time before we have agreed on the ETS, then the one-off cost will be bigger because we will need to adjust to a shorter time to implement it. This means that the reduction objective is minus 61% for the ETS sectors. And this all has been calculated taking into account that we are going to extend to the maritime sector and put it in the ETS as well. We have a separate proposal for review of the market stability reserve. It's because it would otherwise go back to only take in 12% of the oversupply as of 2023. We propose to continue it as it is at the moment. Looking at carbon leakage protection, we propose to have the same basically free allocation system in place as we have currently. It will continue to be based on benchmarks on the 10% best performing installation, and it will still receive 43% of the overall number of allowances and keep the 3% buffer. But what we do propose is to target it better because with a higher overall reduction target, there will be fewer allowances in the system, and there's a risk, and our calculations have shown that we will need to put in place a factor, the one we call the cross-sector correction factor, to reduce free allocation equally to all sectors towards the end of this decade, if we continue with the rules as they are. We find that this is not the very good way of reducing free allocation. There could be better and more targeted ways. So we propose to increase the maximum annual update rate of the benchmarks to 2.5% from 1.6%, which will mean that those sectors that decarbonize fast, that have introduced new technologies and have really reduced their carbon intensity of their production, they will be the ones that need less free allocation, they will have less emissions, and therefore they will have the high update rate. We don't propose that the sectors with the very low update rates close below 1.6 and down to the minimum update rate of 0.2, that there are any changes for those sectors. We also propose to broaden the scope of the benchmarks because some of the benchmarks we have are based on fossil fuel technologies. And when we would like to encourage green hydrogen, but the hydrogen-based benchmark is based on the fossil fuel technology, and the same for steel, and there could be for a few other benchmarks. So we propose that we remove the barriers and adjust the benchmarks so that these technologies are on par with the fossil fuel technologies, at least for an extra period. It should incentivize the sectors to decarbonize and move to the new technologies, whereas if we keep the system as it is currently, there could be a disincentive because immediately as you are using new technology, you would lose your free allocation. And then finally, we propose also conditionality. This is to ensure that energy efficiency audits are going to be implemented. This is an obligation that all the large companies have already to do energy audits. And we think that it is important measures, if they can be implemented cost effectively within 5 years, they should be. And if companies are not ready to invest in this, well, maybe it's not worth putting free allocation to them either. So we propose to put a conditionality on that. Then a word on how the free allocation is interplaying with the new measure, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. We have ensured that there's a clear phase out for those sectors that are going to be in the CBAM. So this is not ceramics, it's steel, cement, fertilizers, and aluminium. They will reduce over a 10-year period the free allocation, and then gradually the CBAM will be increased. Those allowances that will not be given for free to the sectors covered by CBAM, they will be auctioned, and the revenues will go to the Innovation Fund. So there will be quite an increase of the revenues to the Innovation Fund. And this is one thing we really want to support, the decarbonization efforts and implementation of your new roadmap that's going to come out tomorrow depend very much also on changing technology. The Innovation Fund should be able to support projects in this area. We have already seen that there has been a very huge subscription to the Innovation Fund. There's been a lot of projects proposed. It's been a very big success. So we propose to increase it from 450 million to 650 million allowances, most of it coming from the new ETS on road transport and buildings. But then on top, we will add those allowances not needed to give out for free to the CBAM sectors. And with that in place, we will basically double the size of the Innovation Fund. We also propose that member states must use all the revenues from the ETS to green climate and energy initiatives. And then we will address the distributional effect of emission trading by increasing the modernization fund to the double. This is the main ETS. Just a couple of words on road transport and buildings. We have proposed a separate ETS for those sectors. They are responsible for around 30% of the total greenhouse gases and more than half of the emissions under the effort sharing regulation. In both sectors, we see increasing emissions still by 2% for buildings between 2014 and 19, and with 7% in road transport. It's also a little bit because we see that ETS already covers electricity production, and therefore all the electricity used in road transport and also in buildings is already covered in the ETS. So around 30% of the heating emissions is already covered. So it's also to create kind of a similar system across the whole road transport and building area. So it will be an upstream emission trading system. We will address the fuel suppliers that will have to comply based on the amount of fuels that are sold for road transport and for the building sector. Yeah. What is important is that we need to intensify also renewable energy and energy efficiency in the transport and transport policies, and that we maintain national policies in these sectors. Let me just then go briefly to the last slide on road transport and buildings. We don't see a risk of carbon leakage, so all allowances will be auctioned. There's no reason for free allocation. What we do see is that there will be a relatively hardest impact on the vulnerable households and those that have, shall we say, long transport needs. And this is important to address, both with national policies, but also through the new social climate fund that we are proposing. It can be used to address such social impacts from the new ETS on vulnerable groups. We propose that there will be around 72 billion euros in the fund and that member states use a similar amount for this. It could be in the short term to give direct support to households where there is a need if energy costs, for example, are increasing or if transport costs are increasing for them. And then to recall that overall all the auction revenues from emission trading go to member states and they can use them in addition to this purpose. A last slide on maritime transport. So we have also proposed to include the maritime transport in the existing ETS. We have already aviation, and now we're also putting maritime transport. They are a relatively small sector, so they can be added more easily to the existing ETS than road transport and buildings that are almost the same size as the current ETS. So in order to make sure that we are not disturbing the ETS that is working very well, we have made a separate for road transport and building. But maritime is going to be included in the existing ETS. It has a geographical scope of all the intra-EU voyages plus half of the extra one. So if you sail to Japan and back, then half the one way is going to be included, not the other way. And then all emissions that you have in harbors. It's going to be flag neutral, so it's all flags that are going to be covered. It's the same principles that are going to apply for maritime sectors that is applicable to all the other sectors in the ETS. And we build already on an already existing system for monitoring emissions and verifying emissions in the ETS. There will also not be any free allocation for the maritime, but a phase-in period of 3 years where they only are going to have compliance for a share of the emissions. This was a very brief overview of our revision of the ETS, just to give you an overview of what it is. And I'm very happy to take any questions on this, but also on interlinkages with other policies, of course. Thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Mette Quinn. No doubt there will be questions later on. I understand Mrs. Rodríguez-Piñero needs to leave now, so thank you very much for hosting us today again, and good luck with your work. We're moving on now with the program and the next speaker, and that is Elisabetta Gualmini, who is joining us now online. Elisabetta, are you with us?
Apologize, sorry. I have been asked to speak at 3:40, and I have to leave at 4 o'clock sharp. So you can decide.
That is fine for me. I'm just looking at the organizers here. Is it okay if we switch to Mr. Liese? Yes, okay.
I have to go away at 4:20, but I think it is okay.
Very sorry, Mrs. Gualmini. We'll turn to Peter Liese first because he needs to leave, and then we'll turn to you right afterwards. Peter Liese, go ahead. You have the floor.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, but you can imagine as a rapporteur for the file, I'm quite busy. Some say I'm popular, but I'm not sure if I'm popular, but many people want to speak to. But it's a pleasure for me also to address the audience of a very important European industry, and I apologize for the inconvenience, but I really have to leave at 4. So, the subject is crucial. It's about the future of our planet and the possibility how our children and grandchildren will be able to live in this world. It's really true that we are the first generation that already suffers from climate change. Even in my constituency, there was a flooding in summer, and we saw forest fires and heat waves in Europe. Other parts of the world are even more affected. And if we don't act fast, we will achieve dangerous tipping points. That is the point why we are maybe the last generation that can do something about it. If we don't act globally, then we will not be able to give our children and grandchildren a planet where they can still manage the problem. I have been in Glasgow last week, and of course the result is not really good, but there was a lot of positive development. You know, when we were in Madrid 2 weeks ago, the European Union was the first major economy to announce that they want to be climate neutral. Now, the big majority of the world has followed, not all with the same date and the same clarity, but climate neutrality is the new normal. So every stakeholder, also every industry, has to find its way to climate neutrality. There is no way out. So to argue that that is not possible is no longer an option. But on the other hand, and while I in principle support the Commission proposal, most of the aspects are well balanced, there are still challenges to be addressed. For me, it's very important, for my political group, that we decarbonize European industry and not de-industrialize Europe. That means we need to avoid carbon leakage. And here I think the Commission proposal can still be improved. The Commission themselves admits that there may be a situation in the end of the period where even companies that are best performers, so belong to the 10% best in their sector, fulfill all the benchmarks that are more ambitious than in the existing ETS, they still fall short and have to buy certificates. And I think we need to address this issue. It will not be easy because if we want more free allowances, where should we take them away? I think definitely not from the Innovation Fund or from other important things. But as we heard from the Commission, there is also the proposal to include the maritime sector in the ETS, and the aviation sector is already included. And while every ton of cement, every ton of steel, every ton of other raw material, chemicals and so on, also ceramic, naturally, of course, can be imported from China or elsewhere, it is not possible to replace a trip to Europe by a trip to Argentina. If I want to go to Europe, I need to go to the European port. And it's very good that the Commission didn't propose flag-based scheme, but a route-based scheme. And the same applies for aviation. It's only internal European flights that are covered by the ETS. And that means there is, of course, a minor risk of carbon leakage, but it's not comparable with the fixed installations carbon leakage risk, because you produce a product that can easily be imported. And that's why I think we need to look at this. We need to look at this also as a source of additional free allowances. Aviation and maritime get a lot of free allowances until 2027. And on the other hand, best performers in ceramic, steel, lime, cement, chemical industry will be short, even if they are the best performers. So that needs to be discussed. I very much welcome the increase of the Innovation Fund. I encourage everybody to work on innovation and use the fund on top of additional money that should come from the member states and from other EU funds. We need to look at the international dimension. So in Glasgow, it was very clear when we cover, for example, third country imports by CBAM, we also need to see if we can really charge imports from low developed countries, least developed countries, and they don't get a benefit. This is something we also need to discuss. Last point, the new ETS. You may think it's also like maritime, not important for you because it covers other parts of the society, not the production industry, but everything is interconnected. No, more ambition in maritime and aviation, less free allowances will allow us to protect companies from carbon leakage. And a real system that works also in transportation and buildings will also make it easier to achieve the target and will put away the pressure from industry to deliver even more ambitious targets. It is already politically decided that the production industry that is already covered by the ETS will be subject to more ambition. You don't have a 55% target, you have a 61% target, and even the baseline is different. So transport and buildings have less ambition than industry. And while this is justified in the electricity sector, the way to decarbonize is very clear. In industry, it is a challenge. And I think we can only make the climate neutrality and we can only achieve our ambitious targets if everybody does its bit. And if everybody, every individual and every company that decarbonizes, that puts the decarbonizing or climate-friendly decision also in private households should be rewarded and should be better off than those that continue to pollute. Of course, there are social challenges, but they are also in the existing ETS. Electricity prices are a problem for low-income families. And also, if we overstretch it in industry, loss of jobs is a huge social problem. So let's not think that only in the new ETS we have social issues, but the first time the Commission proposes a social fund. And I think this is very important to, at the same time, give a signal. Everybody that reduces its carbon footprint or produces something that helps other people to reduce the carbon footprint should be rewarded. And we have a lot of income also generated by the ETS. Command and control measures do not create income. So that is also an advantage. We can use this income also to reduce existing taxes and fees, like the high prices even on renewable electricity in many member states. So I think we need to do this. CO2 needs a price. And I think in the long run, it should be for all economic sectors so that all those that reduce emissions will be rewarded. And that's why also this discussion on the new ETS is part of the big debate. So please don't only tell me what you want, less ambition or more friendly treatment. It will be difficult, but we want to avoid carbon leakage, but also look at other parts of the proposal and see the whole picture. I have to do this as a rapporteur, and the more people have a comprehensive look and have a global understanding on the challenge and the opportunities, the better off we are. Thank you very much, and apologies again for my time constraints. Sorry.
Mr. Liese, do you have a minute to answer a quick question, maybe?
A minute, definitely, yes. It's not 4 o'clock yet, sorry.
Very quickly, the ceramics sector is mostly made up of small emitters and SMEs. Do you think this merits special consideration under the ETS revision? And particularly, I'm thinking of two things there. It's first the benchmark issues, the issue of benchmarks for the best performing producers, and also the audits that will become necessary now for companies to apply for free allowances under the ETS. Do you think these 2 points merit special consideration?
So, yeah, first of all, SMEs always merit special consideration. You know, I was grown up in an SME, and I know how hard it is to earn money, and how difficult some of the regulations are for entrepreneurs. I didn't make up my mind on these specific points, because one thing is clear. We may need special treatment for SMEs, but all over the whole economy must decarbonize. And that should be the target. The question, how we do it exactly, with which kind of measures, and could we take a special consideration of SMEs, that needs to be looked at. I'm happy for your proposals, and we'll definitely have a close look at them. Thank you.
Today. We can turn now to our next speaker, and that is Elisabetta Gualmini from the Socialists and Democrats. Elisabetta, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you so much for the invitation to Ceramica. And also special thank to the president of the European Parliament Ceramics Forum, my colleague Inmaculada Rodríguez-Piñero, who just left, but I want to thank her all the same, because we are working together a lot, not only on the legislative measures of the Fit for 55 climate package, but also on the issue concerning the revision of the guidelines on the state aids rules for the environment, climate, and energy. Well, speaking instead of the topics of today, of course, it is clear that the package of proposals presented by the European Commission last July, that is Fit for 55, directly impacts and involves the ceramics sector in the challenge of decarbonization and in the achievement of the climate objectives that at the European level are also sort of sanctioned by under the climate law. And it is also clear that decarbonization, together with a new Green Deal, together with green policies, are at the center, at the core of the EU political agenda in this legislature. So we do know the importance of these goals. A brief mention on the results, the very recent results on the achievement of a compromise at the COP26 in Glasgow. Of course, we were a little bit disappointed because there was this very last blitz by India, and the targets have more or less been slowed down even further. But in any case, the compromise was acceptable, and of course we do hope that the challenge of the climate change will be achieved in a very good way. But we have to say that we have to act with a lot of good sense, we would say, buon senso, and a lot of balance, you know, between, of course, the necessity to reach the so-called green goals on the one hand, and on the other, also the necessity to accompany companies and enterprises, especially in the highly intensive energy sector, like the one of ceramics. We have to accompany them in the ecological transition in order for them to maintain competitive and also in order for them not to have bad consequences in terms of labor and employment. So, so we have to find a good balance between these two important goals. Among the 14 legislative proposals included in the Fit for 55, there are mainly two that I will be dealing with as a full member of the Budget Committee. Of course, the revision of the ETS directive and the regulation on the border carbon adjustment mechanism. I will also closely follow the other legislative dossier, in particular the Social Climate Fund, even though this fund will affect the ceramic sector less directly. As for the CBAM and the ETS directive, in the Budget Commission, I will have exclusive competence, together with my colleagues, for those aspects which concern the revenue that will be generated and that will become new own resources. So this, you know, the introduction of the CBAM, for instance, will provoke and generate new own resources that will not only serve to make the European taxation more autonomous and independent, but also to fully finance the costs and their interests of Next Generation EU. And this is, of course, another important goal. As for the two measures, so I will start briefly from the CBAM. I do remember, as Immaculada Rodriguez already said, that a few months ago, the request we assisted in a very important request by Ceramica, that is the one to exclude to keep out the ceramic sector from the carbon adjustment mechanism at the border, because it was not to be considered as an effective tool to protect the ceramic industry and especially all its small and medium-sized enterprises from the phenomenon of carbon leakage. So I'm very happy to say, as Rodriguez already said, that a positive result is that in the regulation on the CBAM, we do not have the ceramic sector included. And another positive point is the fact that the Commission has foreseen a transitional period, 2023 up to 2025, for the sectors that are currently involved. So we will discuss the timing, but in any case, this gradual time and this transition is, of course, incredibly important. And of course, we will monitor carefully eventual future revisions of the regulation on the CBAM. But I have to say that I do agree with the position expressed by Ceramica on the fact that the CBAM really has to involve sectors, industrial sectors, which are highly exposed to imports. So we do not understand, I mean, it wouldn't be understandable why the ceramic sector should be involved, since the ceramic sector is a sector which is highly exposed but to exports and not to imports. So the logic is not very clear in the eventual inclusion. But up to now, I think that we have a good result. And in addition, also, the fact that the industrial sectors is made up of thousands and thousands of SMEs, which are also subjected to high carbon price volatility, is another, is another cause, another motive not to include this sector in the CBAM. Not to speak about the heterogeneity of products and processes And so we also do understand that it would be incredibly difficult to establish product benchmarks because also because of the fragmentation and heterogeneity of the sector. So as for the ETS, I have to say in the very first place that, of course, we are in the middle of the phase 4. So the phase 4 has basically just begun, and the phase 4 is considered to last and to have an effect from 2021 until 2030. And now we have this necessary, of course, revision of the directive. So another, change of the rules. And I think that we should really be careful when we change the rules of the game continuously, because companies and enterprises do need stability. Also in planning and programming, they are changing, they are ecological transitions, they are new production models. And so the idea that we change the rule of the game very frequently is not maybe a good way for our companies for our European companies to plan and to act. In any case, I think that there are some positive points in the directive. Absolutely, the strengthening of the system of the ETS as a tool to fight against carbon leakage, and it is also a good mechanism, especially through the phasing out, through a gradual phasing out, to incentivize companies to reduce emissions. Secondly, another important point is the one related to the innovation fund. Also, the rapporteur from PPE has already mentioned this point. So we hope that the ceramic sector will be absolutely able to apply to this fund, because there are resources for introducing alternative renewable sources of energy. And so this is a very important channel of financing. And finally, we do think that also the inclusion of the maritime sector is another good point to be taken into consideration. And also the encouragement, the promotion of private investments and private participations and financings, again, in order to innovate, but also using other, sources of energy. So we do think that the ETS system has basically worked in an effective way up until now. It was a good mechanism to protect the industrial sector and also to accompany it to a gradual but important decarbonizations. And I do think that if, a little bit of stability in the planning and in the rules proposed by the Commission is more present, I think that we can, of course, have a higher and more friendly environment, both for institutions and for the companies. I stop here saying that I'm very much aware of the importance of the ceramic sector. I live closely to the Sassuolo district, so I know how much important is the ceramic sector for the employment, for the social cohesion of our communities, for innovation and quality. We know that we are facing a humongous challenge, the one to change radically the models of production in order to meet the goals of neutrality and the fight to climate change. I think that if we really interact together and if we keep on dialoguing and talking together and try to build up the best conditions for everyone, I think that we will be able to achieve this goal together. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elisabetta, Gualmini, and I understand that you need to leave as well in 5 minutes. So before you do, let me put the same question to you that asked to Peter Liese. So considering the fact that the ceramics industry is made up mostly of SMEs and small emitters, do you think this is something that needs special consideration as part of the ETS revision? And maybe you can say a words about this benchmark, the upward revision of the benchmarks for the ceramics sector. Do you think that needs to be adjusted? And also the issue of exempting potentially SMEs from audits to apply for free allowances under the ETS. Your views on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I do think that the structural characteristics of an industrial sector have absolutely to be taken into account. So the fact that we are not in front of big, large, huge companies, but of networks and networks of small, even very, very small and medium-sized companies is absolutely to be taken into consideration, because we are talking of an industrial sector where, of course, fragmentation among companies and also heterogeneity among the production processes and the products is very, very high. So we cannot compare this industrial sector to another one where we just have big and large companies. So I do think that the European Commission should take in more consideration, in more account, these structural characteristics, because this is really structure. So it is not a good, bad will. It is how the sector is designed. And since this is this is one of the most important industrial sectors in Europe, I do think that the issue of the benchmarks maybe has to be revised and analyzed in a very accurate way. And secondly, as for the audits, I'm more uncertain about this. So I do not know if it is fair or if it is a good idea to escape audits, because I mean, no one, and especially companies, should, of course, be frightened by audits. So I know that the fact that it is another bureaucratic burden, I do absolutely understand, but I'm quite uncertain about this point. Whereas I'm very much keen on asking the European Commission really a very strict and careful analysis on the benchmarks. So thank you to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elisabetta Gualmini, for joining us today. Let me turn now to our next speaker, and that is Alexandr Vondra.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me, you can see me. Thanks for the invitation. I would like to take my remark a little bit more broadly, and the reason is simple. The proposals we have on the table since July, and with which such a radical changes in such a short time, that in many sectors it will be a matter of bare survival. And the strategy needs, according to my opinion, to be adapted accordingly. Our goal should be clear: to minimize the damages, and in particular for SMEs, like in the energy-intensive industry, like ceramics, for example. The starting point is also clear, and there is no need to question if we don't want to be automatically excluded from the debate. Climate change is there, and the EU has to decide to combat it by accelerating its decarbonization program by 2030 to become carbon neutral by 2050. This is easy to say, but much more difficult it's to make. And that's why the European Commission, supported by many of my fellow MEPs, has come up with a trick of the climate law, after which there is reportedly no way back. We simply have to endorse the Fit for 55, otherwise we will not reduce emission by at least 55% by 2030. I would like to make two comments here. Firstly, I am not the climate activist. I am an MEP who is representing the people in my country who have their concern as well as the businesses. And I did not vote in favor of the climate law. And secondly, if we are to give an impression that we are democrats in the EU, we cannot consider Fit for 55 just to be automatically endorsed. The devil, as you know it better than anybody else, is hidden in details. This is how we need to approach Fit for 55. Coldly analyze what is inside, what the consequence will be, and then make an attempt to persuade those who claim that the package is already done. In my opinion, one of the biggest issues is how the European Commission arbitrarily works with its impact assessments and how it draws conclusions for which it has no relevant data. Here, it is necessary to immediately come up with the alternative, but at the same time, argumentatively strong views, which will convince co-legislators that the European Commission is wrong, or that it is at least overly optimistic about the practical functioning of the rules that Fit for 55 counts on. The other issue is not much talked about, but will become more visible over time. The Commission has presented Fit for 55 as a package which must remain at least as ambitious as the Commission presented in July. But where does the Commission get a certainty that this will actually happen? Where does the Commission take the certainty that the revamped EU ETS will eventually include the road transportation and building sector, that thus reducing the availability of individual transport and proprietary housing? And also, where does the Commission take the certainty that CBAM will indeed be considered WTO compliant, that will be accepted by other heavyweights of the world economy like China, US, and others, and that they will not retaliate and will not result in a major trade war? Closely related to these issues is also the question of linking the individual proposal within the Fit for 55 package, as the Commission conceived it as a puzzle in which each piece has its place. However, even the European Parliament, we discussed the various proposals separately, the EU ETS, the MSR, the CBAM, or the effort sharing legislation, for example. And I am not completely sure whether we will avoid unnecessary mistakes that could make the result inapplicable. I know that climate activists will not forgive me, but I think we must take the opposite end. We need to build on relevant impact assessments, have a look behind the thickets of legal standards, which means that we have to have a look at people and companies who will carry out the decarbonization process, since it will be them who will decide how successful our future mission is. In practice, this means, for example, that we will not embark on an adventure with the rapid cancellation of free allowances and the immediate introduction of CBAM when we do not even know whether the WTO will approve it. And that we will not bluntly support the extension of the EU ETS to new sectors if we don't even have enough money to mitigate the negative social impact of such a measure. And no, climate social fund, which has been mentioned by the reporter, my friend Peter Liese, with the current expected amount will not solve anything, because, if Franz Timmermans expect that we would have 50 to 150 million people with the energy poverty, then, the money which are designated for the social fund cannot fix the problem at all. So those who are not blind can see it. Energy prices are rising in the EU, and the Fit for 55 has not yet made it. What happens when we endorse it? Another warming is just concluded COP26 summit in Glasgow. Support for concrete steps to implement the Paris Agreement is much lower than the support for declaratory goals to reduce the global warming. And China, India, and others are simply lagging behind. So in summary, I'm in favor of realistic approach on the roads toward decarbonization of energy-intensive industry like ceramics. And, in my fractions, there are the Czechs, Polish, Italian, Spanish. So it's an important part of their industries. So I would gladly work as a shadow on the ETS with the businesses which are open to changes in the legislation that would make Europe more healthy on one hand, but also more and not less competitive with the outside world.
Thanks, Alexandr. Vondra. Can you stay with us for the next half hour, or do you also need to leave?
I need to finish, let's say, in 10 minutes.
Okay, so let me then put the same question to you as the other ones about the fact that the ceramics industry is made up mostly of SMEs and small emitters. Do you think that requires specific attention from the policymakers?
Yeah, I agree with the first question, which you ask about the certain benchmark and to recognize the specificity of the, in particular, the ceramic industry and the SMEs, so small and also medium-sized companies, because certainly they would be fighting for survival. So here I do have the understanding for those proposals, and certainly I would be ready to work with you on them. Then is the other issue, and that's the auditing. And here I would say I'm more skeptical because, look, on one hand, the European Commission were not able to submit really detailed impact assessments of any of those proposals. So on one hand, the European Commission is not fulfilling what its obligation. And on the other hand, the idea that we would add the burden of auditing on, in particular on SMEs, that means that we will load them with a huge administrative burden. So until the Commission will not live up to its commitment and will really bring a detailed impact assessments, not just for the EU as a whole, but also for each member states and each sector of the industries, then I think I would be really careful in bringing some additional bureaucratic burden on the businesses.
Thanks, Alexandr Vondra, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
We can turn now to our final speaker, and that is Emilio Mussini, chairman of the Panaria Group. Emilio.
Parlerò in italiano perché voglio essere certo di esprimere i concetti senza, diciamo, fraintendimenti. Il mio punto di vista di rappresentante delle imprese ceramiche credo che sia opportuno che lo riporti esattamente come lo sentono gli imprenditori e quindi il mio discorso sarà molto incentrato su alcuni punti specifici.
Okay, I will speak Italian because I want to make sure that my message will be as clear as possible. Of course, I will bring the standpoint of Italian entrepreneurs, and for this reason, I will focus my speech on some of the most important topics for them.
Il settore ceramico italiano negli anni si è contraddistinto per il costante impegno nel perseguire le politiche ambientali tese alla continua riduzione dell'impatto ambientale delle proprie produzioni. Oggi ha delle performance che sono senza dubbio di eccellenza. Questi risultati sono stati raggiunti investendo negli ultimi 5 anni circa il 10% del fatturato per realizzare nuovi impianti produttivi con la migliore tecnologia possibile.
Over the years, the Italian ceramic sector has stood out for its relentless commitment to pursue environmental policies aimed at steadily reducing the environmental impact of their factories. Today, the ceramic industry boasts an outstanding performance, and these outcomes were made possible by investing about 10% of their turnover over the past 5 years to build state-of-the-art facilities.
Le nuove sfide di decarbonizzazione introdotte dal Green Deal, volte alla neutralità climatica al 2050, comportano un radicale ripensamento dei processi produttivi. È una sfida che abbiamo accolto e analizzato in un recente studio condotto con Boston Consulting Group, che ha messo in evidenza come per raggiungere i nuovi obiettivi sarà necessario adottare un portafoglio di tecnologie diverse, senza pregiudizi, alcune delle quali non sono però ancora in una fase industriale.
The new decarbonization challenges introduced by the Green Deal, aimed at attaining carbon neutrality by 2050, will imply a radical overhaul of the production processes. We took up the challenge and recently commissioned a study carried out with Boston Consulting Groups. The results are the following. First, in order to reach the new target, a different and diverse portfolio of technologies, regardless of their nature, must be adopted, even though some of these technologies have not reached the industrial phase yet.
Sarà fondamentale l'accesso a nuovi combustibili carbon free, ma sicuramente questo non potrà avvenire prima del 2030, almeno nell'applicazione della tecnologia ceramica. Il gas naturale non potrà quindi essere sostituito nell'immediato e resterà per il settore il miglior combustibile per il periodo di transizione.
The access to new carbon-free fuel is paramount, though it won't be possible before 2030, at least for the ceramics industry. And thirdly, and consequently, natural gas will not be replaced in the short term and will therefore remain the best transitional fuel for the industry.
Cogliamo quindi l'occasione di questo incontro per evidenziare alle istituzioni la necessità di politiche che accompagnino l'industria in questa importante sfida che noi vogliamo cogliere. All'interno del pacchetto Fit for 55 diversi dossier rivestono un ruolo di primaria importanza strategica per la nostra industria. Il mio intervento si concentrerà su 3 di questi dossier.
Evidently, this event gives us the opportunity to present to the institutions the need to introduce policies able to support and accompany the industries and businesses in this very important challenge. Within the Fit for 55 package, several dossiers play a key strategic role for our industry, and my talk will focus on 3 of these.
Segnaliamo come la revisione del sistema ETS presenti importanti criticità. Primo, la proposta di inasprire ulteriormente i benchmark introducendo un fattore di riduzione del 2,5% all'anno produrrà una sottoassegnazione delle quote gratuite pari al 50%. Questa misura si scontra con l'impossibilità del settore di utilizzare da subito e in misura significativa combustibili diversi dal gas. Ad esempio la biomassa è oggi una piccolissima frazione e non abbiamo altre tecnologie immediatamente disponibili per convertire la produzione dall'uso del gas ad altre fonti di energia. La revisione del benchmark combustibile non può essere uguale per tutti, ma deve tener conto quindi delle realtà tecnologiche diverse dei vari settori.
I'd like to point out a few critical issues relating to the review of the ETS system. The proposal of further tightening the benchmarks by introducing a 2.5% reduction factor per year will cause 50% less free allowances being allocated. This measure collides with the inability of the industry to use any fuel other than gas immediately and to a significant extent. For instance, today, biomass accounts for a very tiny fraction, and we lack the technology supposed to convert gas into other technologies. And the change of the fuel benchmark cannot be the same across the board, but it should keep into account the technology in use in different sectors.
Il settore delle piastrelle di ceramica risulta escluso dalle linee guida per la compensazione dei costi indiretti, pur superando la soglia dello 0,2 fissata dalla direttiva. Questo perché la Commissione ha introdotto criteri addizionali non previsti. Negare le compensazioni è paradossale perché precluderà gli investimenti in elettrificazione. I maggiori costi che ne derivano comporteranno una redditività negativa già a metà del periodo 2021-2030, con rischi seri per la continuità delle imprese e quindi una riduzione dell'occupazione.
The ceramic tile industry appears to be excluded from the guidelines for the compensation of indirect costs, even though it exceeds the 0.2 threshold set out by the directive, because the Commission introduced unexpected additional criteria. Denying the compensations defies any purposes in that it will prevent electrification investments. The higher costs that this will incur will translate to negative profitability as early as halfway through the 2021-2030 period, at great risk in terms of business continuity and in terms of employment reduction.
Per queste ragioni chiediamo che la Commissione europea riveda quanto prima le linee guida, includendo il settore delle piastrelle, alla luce delle mutate condizioni dei mercati, secondo la procedura già prevista dal paragrafo 68 delle stesse linee guida. In particolare bisogna considerare i maggiori costi dell'energia elettrica che, se non compensati, mineranno la redditività delle imprese ceramiche europee. La nuova direttiva dovrebbe poi rivedere i criteri per le compensazioni, eliminando le discrezionalità introdotte dalla Commissione.
Therefore, we ask the European Commission to revise the guidelines as soon as possible and to include the tile industry in the light of changed market conditions, pursuant to the procedure under paragraph 68 of the same guidelines. More specifically, the higher costs of electricity should be factored in. because unless compensated, they will undermine the profitability of European ceramic companies. Finally, the new directive should revise the compensation criteria, getting rid of the discretions introduced by the Commission.
In ultimo si segnala come il mercato delle quote della CO2 sia fortemente condizionato dall'ingerenza della speculazione finanziaria. Negli ultimi mesi è cresciuto a dismisura il numero dei soggetti finanziari che detengono quote con obiettivi speculativi. La linea rossa del grafico lo mette in evidenza. La speculazione finanziaria sta quindi determinando una distorsione del meccanismo ETS, che perde quindi la sua funzione di guidare la decarbonizzazione del settore manifatturiero.
As a last point, the CO2 quota market is deeply influenced by financial speculation. Over the past few months, the number of financial institutions holding shares with speculative purposes has grown exponentially, as you can see from the red line in the graph. Financial speculation is therefore causing a distortion of the ETS mechanism, which is losing its purpose of leading decarbonization in the manufacturing sector.
Auspichiamo che possa essere fatta chiarezza sul ruolo della speculazione finanziaria introducendo dei correttivi opportuni, anche temporanei ad esempio un tetto del valore delle quote oppure limitando l'accesso al mercato ai soli operatori dei settori obbligati.
We wish some light will be shed on the role of financial speculation and corrections will be introduced, be they temporary, such as a shareholding value cap or restriction to market access to industry operators only.
La proposta di revisione della direttiva sulla tassazione dei prodotti energetici, l'Energy Taxation Directive, prevede la cancellazione dell'esenzione dei prodotti energetici impiegati per usi mineralogici, lasciando invece quelli per usi metallurgici e chimici. Tale modifica risulta per noi incomprensibile, da un punto di vista logico e tecnologico. Nei processi mineralogici l'energia è impiegata direttamente per operare la necessaria trasformazione fisica dei minerali. Questa funzione non è evidentemente mutata nel tempo, come per la metallurgia e la chimica.
The Energy Taxation Directive revision proposal envisages the end of the exemption of energy products used for mineralogical processes, but not for metallurgy and chemical uses. We fail to understand this change, either logically or in terms of technology. In mineralogical processes, energy is used directly to produce a physical change in minerals. It is quite evident that this function has not changed over time, much like in metallurgy or chemistry.
Riteniamo pertanto che dovrebbe essere mantenuta l'esenzione per gli usi mineralogici dei prodotti energetici. Inoltre la proposta di direttiva per fissare le nuove aliquote minime genererebbe una doppia tassazione a carico delle imprese in ETS che già sostengono i costi ambientali dell'energia utilizzata, costi diretti e costi indiretti dell'ETS.
We therefore believe that the exemption of energy products used for mineralogical processes should be maintained. Moreover, the directive proposal sets out new minimum rates. This would entail a double taxation of ETS companies which are already shouldering the environmental costs of the energy they use, direct and indirect costs of the ETS.
La bozza delle nuove linee guida conferma che il rischio di delocalizzazione è valutato sulla base di due parametri, la energy intensity e la trade intensity. Non viene però confermata l'attuale previsione che identifica una situazione di rischio effettivo di delocalizzazione anche per quei settori che sono fortemente dipendenti dall'energia, pur avendo una minore trade intensity. Ciò comporta l'esclusione di alcuni settori ceramici, quali i laterizi, i sanitari e altri prodotti in ceramica.
The new guidelines draft confirms that the risk of delocalization is assessed according to two parameters, energy intensity and trade intensity. It does not confirm, though, the current forecast identifying an actual risk, a delocalization risk, also for those industries that heavily depend on energy, even though they feature lower trade intensity. This implies the exclusion of some ceramic industries, such as bricks, sanitary ware, and other ceramic products.
L'esclusione dalle linee guida, se confermata, non solo comporterebbe una grave perdita di competitività e rischio di delocalizzazione. Basti pensare che per il settore dei laterizi i costi dell'energia incidono per il 45% dei costi di fabbricazione. Essa risulta incoerente con gli obiettivi del Green Deal, in quanto ostacola il processo in corso di decarbonizzazione mediante fonti energetiche green.
If confirmed, the exclusion from the guidelines would cause a great loss of competitiveness and a high delocalization risk. Suffices to think that in the brick industry, energy accounts for as much as 45% of production costs. This measure is inconsistent with Green Deal objectives in that it hinders the ongoing decarbonization process through green energy sources.
Sottolineiamo come le valutazioni della Commissione europea si basano su dati obsoleti dal 2013 al 2015 e parziali solo di 17 Paesi, evidenziando importanti carenze metodologiche, perché in un recente studio condotto da PricewaterhouseCoopers, infatti emerge come l'utilizzo di dati più rappresentativi, 22 Paesi, comporta per il settore dei laterizi un'intensità elettrica superiore alla soglia del 20%, con un'intensità di commercio pari al 7,8%.
We cannot but notice that the conclusions of the European Commission are based on outdated 2013 to 2015 and partial figures concerning only 17 countries, and as such display some methodology faults in our opinion. Indeed, a recent study carried out by PricewaterhouseCoopers shows that using more representative data involving 22 countries for the brick industry, for instance, would result in energy intensity exceeding 20% and trade intensity amounting to 7.8%.
Chiediamo pertanto che venga mantenuto il criterio attualmente vigente della intensità di commercio pari al 4% e dell'intensità elettrica pari del 20% e che venga data la possibilità per gli Stati membri di adottare misure nazionali in parziale deroga alle linee guida per tenere conto della non omogenea distribuzione sul territorio della Comunità Europea di determinate attività industriali.
Finally, we ask that the current 4% trade industry and 20% trade intensity and 20% energy intensity criteria be maintained, and that member states should be given the chance to adopt national measures, be it as a partial exception to the guidelines, in order to account for the uneven distribution of certain industrial activities in the EU.
Grazie per l'attenzione.
Thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks, Mr. Mussini. We will give you, in a minute, the opportunity to respond, because there was a lot of information that was shared, a lot of things that were mentioned. But before we do that, let me first invite all of you to respond to an online poll that you can find on the Slido application. You can try and scanning the QR code that you see behind me. Otherwise, you can try simply on your browser going to slido.com and putting this number in. So I will leave just a few seconds for you to do that. And the question that is being asked in this online poll is, how can the Fit for 55 package support the decarbonization efforts of the ceramics industry? And you can see that there are 4 different options there. So by ensuring increased carbon leakage protection, by delivering a stable legal framework, thanks to EU funds to develop low carbon technologies, or by developing infrastructure to allow the widespread availability of low carbon electricity and green fuels. So if you can take a few minutes to answer that, and while you do so, I am now turning to Mette, Quinn. So what do you make of all that you've heard? There was a lot of data that was shared, quite a few studies were mentioned, a number of requests, some very explicit, were being made. I saw that you were taking notes. Yes, let's hear your reaction, please.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I think I agree very much with the beginning statement by Mr. Mussini. Indeed, new low carbon technology must be taken up by everyone in the sector. There is no other way than the decarbonization way. So I totally agree with this. Oh yes, of course, I forgot that. And I took note of your positions on a number of the issues that are right now being reviewed, and I think I don't need to come in on all of them. But one thing I would like to come in on is the price and the financial speculation. You know that we have seen a high energy price increase over the summer, and it is a huge increase. Based on that, the Commission came out with a paper in the middle of October, also providing a toolbox to member states on what they can do on that. We see it's a problem. It's an issue for me as a normal citizen, but it's certainly an issue for an electro-intensive industry like yours. But it's not due to the carbon. It's not due to the carbon market. That was very clear. It's a very small part, less than 10% or around that, of the price increase in electricity prices that can be said to come from the ETS. It's generally a global phenomenon, and we are hit hard in Europe, but it's also expected to be a transitional phenomenon. But then the price of the ETS, the allowances that have gone up in price, we see that very much as price increase based on the expectations in the market. We have first had a price increase when we had a new ETS revision in 2018, and now in the run-up to the Fit for 55 proposal. So it's very much linked to expectation in the market on the future carbon market. Tomorrow there will be a report coming out by ESMA. The Commission has asked the agency, the European Security Market Agency, to come up with a report on whether there is bad speculation in the market. So I think we should pay attention to what they're going to see. What we have seen is that there is a lot of healthy, a market is always going to have transactions, of course, and it's a healthy market as far as we can see. But let's see what ESMA is going to come out with tomorrow. I think this is probably more or less what they are going to say. We have, and this is very good, it's a financial market, it's a financial instrument. It is governed by financial regulation. We have all the financial regulation that is also valid for other financial products applicable to the ETS. So we have a very clear market surveillance, and member states are doing their effort there, and so is the ESMA in overviewing over it. And I'm sure that if there are things that should be adjusted, that this will be found and would be addressed. But let's not prejudge exactly. The report is going to come tomorrow, so let's see what they are going to say. Yeah, I think for the rest, I will take note of the sector's positions on the proposals. State aid guidelines on environment and energy are under revision. Yeah, it's important that they are done well, but they are still not finalized. So for this, I take note also of your comments on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Mette. Quinn, maybe we can take a look now at the results of the poll, if those are available. So it's still moving, as you can see, but it seems the one getting the most votes is the proposal to develop more infrastructure, in particular in the field of energy, to allow swift decarbonization of the electricity and availability of other green fuels. So that is something that keeps coming up whenever we're talking about decarbonization, whether it's in the ceramics industry or others. It's the availability of green electricity or green fuels, depending on the energy mix. From top of my head, I know the European Commission's long-term strategy has in mind this idea of doubling the share of electricity in the energy mix by 2050, assuming all of that electricity becomes carbon or carbon-free, which is currently not the case. Has this realization sunk in at the European Commission in terms of the proposals that you've put forward in the Fit for 55 package, in terms of the availability of all these different types of fuels? There's a question of speed, obviously, because we're looking at 2030, which is really around the corner. So any thoughts about that?
Well, we are 100% aware that there's an enormous need for decarbonized electricity, for more renewable energy overall, and also for better infrastructure to move around the renewable energy and better interconnections between the countries. So we are supporting this in general through the various Commission programs and infrastructure programs, but also the new recovery funds will be able to support this energy transition even further. And then we are also pointing out that, and this is in the latest communication on the energy prices, that there are some bottlenecks in certain member states that needs to be addressed. We need to be faster at permitting, and I hear everywhere that it's not a matter of financing. There is finance available, but the problem is often that there are these bottlenecks for getting the projects off the ground, and this is often national policy, but we need to try and help getting these bottlenecks undone.
Thanks, Mrs. Mette. Quinn. Maybe a final question or remark coming from the audience. I see there's a hand raised here in front. If we can get a microphone through to that gentleman. It's here on the third row.
Thank you. My name is Franz Meyer, on behalf of RHI Magnesita refractory producer. We saw also in the poll that infrastructure and renewable energy is of most concern. And we, as a very fragmented sector, are really of high concern that even if 80% of renewable or okay. Of renewable fuels are available, it doesn't mean that ceramics will get 80%. We really concerned that 60% will go
Yes, this is a concern often heard from the smaller players is, will they get access to the few amounts of renewable fuels or electricity that will be available?
Yeah, this is not my real expertise, the energy markets in detail. But I know it's one of the concerns that we are addressing with, for example, hydrogen, that you're also going to need a lot. Where we have stated also from the Commission side that we need to ensure that the hydrogen that's available is not just available to big companies, but it's available to also the small companies. There will not be that much still. It will be rather small until 2030, but then a lot more after that. So when we look at in the hydrogen, which I think you are also going to be needing for your sector, there we are very concerned to make sure that it's accessible for smaller countries as well. On the energy market, yeah, I'm not sure how this can be done in the best way, but I take note of your concern.
Thanks, Mrs. Mette Quinn. I think we've run already above the time that we had allotted for us. So thanks, everyone. Thanks to our speakers for joining today, both online and physically. We'll now take a short coffee break before the second panel starts in about 15 minutes from now, and that will be a discussion on sustainable finance. Thank you very much.
It sounds like we're ready to begin in here. Are we ready online? Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Johannes Drielsma, and I've been asked to moderate the second panel this afternoon at the European Parliament Ceramics Forum. The title of the panel is Sustainable Finance, Opportunities and Challenges. I myself am an environmental engineer with about 20 years' experience here in the Brussels bubble, mainly in the area of EU raw materials policy. More recently, I was invited to serve together with a couple of our panellists today on the EU platform for sustainable finance, which is advising the Commission on how to set the necessary criteria for sustainable financing. So I think sustainable finance is hugely important for all of you participating today, because your companies and the people that finance them will very soon be required to publicly disclose what you will hear referred to as taxonomy compliance. I believe that this will trigger changes to how you raise capital and how your permits are issued. And with reference to the last panel, it may even change some of your ideas about how you may implement the Fit for 55 package. So change brings challenges, but it also brings opportunities. And so I do urge you to engage with our panel over the next hour or so to hear their ideas on how to prepare. We will hear from each of the panelists in turn and then open the floor for questions. In the meantime, I believe there's a Slido address that you can already refer to, where some polling questions are waiting for you, and you should feel free to enter questions of your own during the panel. We'll do our best to convey those questions to the panelists. So, without any further ado, perhaps I can already introduce our first panelist who's online today. It's Mr. Titas Anuskevicius, I hope I pronounced that well. He's Policy Officer at DG GROW in the European Commission. Since 2018, he deals with energy-intensive industries and their transition to climate neutrality. Among other things, for the last 3 years, he's also been following the development of the taxonomy. So, Titas, please, I look forward to hearing your comments for the audience today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Just confirmation, can you hear me well? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good, great. So I think I have an echo a bit, but let's hope it's going to go away. So looking into taxonomy, I think we're probably going to have a mixed result in the room. Some people know quite a lot about it. For some, will be quite new. But actually, the whole thing started in 2015. So Paris Agreement really pushed Commission to think what's the role of sustainable finance in green transition. And eventually, already by mid-2018, we had a non-permanent group advising us on how to start the work of developing criteria in order to define what is sustainable, what is not. And so this work is really started somewhere around there. And even though we hear about the first delegated act, second delegated act coming out, but this is actually in the making for quite a while. I'm not personally involved in a platform, as this commission is serving as only as secretariat, and DG GROW is not directly involved there. But at the same time, it's extremely interesting and important initiative from our perspective. And obviously, Green Deal came after 2015 and 2018 when this whole thing started, but it really slides in so well into what challenges we have related to Green Deal and reaching carbon neutrality by 2050. Well, climate neutrality, sorry, it's the wrong word. So from the transition of industry will require tremendous overhaul. We'll need to change everything: production processes, sourcing, transport. So basically, and all that eventually means investment. Europe will need estimated 350 billion in additional investment per year to meet its 2030 emission reduction targets in energy system alone. And the estimate is additional 130 billion per year will need in our environmental goals. These are numbers coming from sustainable finance strategy. So if we're looking for this kind of additional investment, and we talk about need to create business case for these investments, the part of finance is obviously becoming extremely important. And I think our work with energy intensive industries on master plan a couple of years ago for transition of energy intensive industries to carbon neutrality, to climate neutrality is also indicates that, even a couple of years ago, one of the key themes in development of a master plan was access to finance. So how are we going to do it? So if now stepping back a bit, so what is happening with taxonomy and all sustainable finance track? Taxonomy is one bit of that. Other things are some tools for financial market participants, such as green bond standards, that's also coming out at the same time. And also disclosure framework for companies on sustainable reporting. It all boils down to the point of, you need able to evaluate what you have and where you're going. And you need to be able to, to have that reflection at any point of time in order to do a transition. So from that perspective, taxonomy is sort of is really important of saying what is sustainable, what is not. At the same time, if we look into taxonomy, it's a major work, because from DG GROW perspective, ideally, we would take every single value chain and look at it from that perspective. How do we transition it? What are key parts, and how do we need to finance? But developing taxonomy is basically it's impossible. They had to start it somewhere. And the choice was that they're based on NACE codes of activities, and at initial steps, the work was concentrated basically on the biggest activities that, maybe I'll step back. When we talk about sustainable finance, we talk about 6 criteria so far. So it's climate criteria, for which delegated act was, and technical criteria for defining activities that contribute substantially to climate change mitigation and adaptation. So this criteria were already developed, and this first delegated act was adopted already by the Commission on 6th of July and is now under scrutiny period by co-legislators. If all goes well, entry into force is of this first delegated act is 1st January 22. Furthermore, at the moment, there is ongoing work on the second delegated act, which is basically would concentrate on 4 environmental objectives. So when we talk about taxonomy, and we basically talk about companies meeting one of these 6 criteria, and at the same time not doing significant harm to any other criteria. So it's a major work basically to analyze every single activity from these perspectives. In maybe not all of them are needed to cover every single activity, because some activities will be important from one perspective but not from other. But at the same time, it's a major work basically to look every single activity there is in our economy and to say what is sustainable, what is not, knowing at the same time that technologies are changing. What we consider sustainable at the moment might be viewed a bit differently in the future, and so on and so on and so on. So for now, at this stage, what taxonomy is looked at, and the first delegated act on climate objectives is for activities the biggest greenhouse gas emissions. And first delegated act already covers 80% of greenhouse gas emissions, so which is a lot. But at the same time, if you look, not all energy intensive industries are covered. And in this case, we see that ceramic sector is not there yet. On one side, because the emissions were not big enough to be included at this stage. And at this stage, only steel, aluminium, cement are 3 biggest ones in terms of emissions were included and covered by criteria. At the same time, it's already now taxonomy is directly applicable to ceramic sector, in my view, because it sets the standards for buildings, it sets standards for other things where basically influence what you do and which products you put on the market and what market is looking for. So probably from that perspective, as I wanted to mention, I was asked also to tell you so what is in taxonomy and a couple of key concepts. So one of them, as I mentioned, is substantial contribution. So the activities that we see now covered by taxonomy are the ones who basically provide substantial contribution to either climate objectives or environmental objectives. Second part, very important concept is transitional activities. So among the activities which are included in taxonomy, there are ones where we still don't have the final answer how we want these activities to be done in 2050 carbon neutral world. We would be still having activities like steel making, for example, where we still don't have a clean technology to produce it at 0 emissions. So these kind of activities will be still looking for best-in-kind technologies and to recognize that, but at the same time, which is not probably in most cases, it's not the final answer. And we know that at some point, activities like steel will have a different criteria, different requirements, which tougher than what we'll see in the first delegated act. And the third important concept I wanted to touch is enabling activities. That's the ones who are important for inclusion because they allow, because they make substantial contribution to one or more of the objectives, but at the same time does not lead to a lock-in in assets undermining long-term environmental objectives, considering the economic lifetime of those assets, and also has a substantial positive environmental impact on the basis of our life cycle considerations. so here is one of the things where many of raw materials, many of, let's say, critical raw materials, many of the activities of energy-intensive industries, from my perspective, have really part in taxonomy, even if their own emissions, luckily, we can say, are not so big in order to make the first cut for inclusion. But at the same time, eventually, when we're looking at activities, what are building blocks in order to build this sustainable future? A lot of energy-intensive industries products and activities are really, from our perspective, should be included eventually. Other thing maybe to mention that if you are not in taxonomy now or in the future, it doesn't mean that these activities are harmful. As I mentioned, what we're looking, or what was looked at in inclusion in taxonomy is basically something that gives the highest contribution, substantial contribution to one of these criteria, or is clear enabling activity. At the same time, as I mentioned, this is ongoing work, either based for expansion in new activities. At the same time, is also will be changing in the future with development of technologies. I think I'm vastly over time already, so I will probably gonna stop here and provide any further inputs or comments after other speakers speak.
Yes, thank you, Titas. You touched upon many things that I think are very relevant to the audience here. In particular, trying to pass out from the documents available today, to what extent products are covered by the taxonomy, to what extent activities are covered. You mentioned that some of the activities are not yet covered in the taxonomy, and this does not mean anything particularly negative. And as I understand, the activity of producing ceramics is not yet covered. I don't know if we have time for one question for Titas, or whether we should move on. Is Titas still available? No, we'll move on. Okay. He's staying, and so we'll have him back for the Q&A. Well, then I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and that's Monsieur Alexandre Affre from Business Europe, the Deputy Director General there. Alexandre is responsible for coordinating on industrial strategy, energy, climate, environment, research, and innovation, as well as entrepreneurship and SMEs at Business Europe. Business Europe is the federation that brings together many of the business sectors of the EU. However, Alexandre is also a trained ecologist, so he's very well versed in the environmental objectives, having worked previously with the IUCN, a very well-renowned global network of green NGOs. So, Alexandre, I would love to hear from you, your take on sustainable finance for the ceramics industry, please.
Thank you, Johannes, and good evening to everyone. So yeah, I'm happy to do this. I do my very best. I think I should be mentioning in the first place that I think it's mentioned on the program. I'm a member of the Sustainable Finance Platform. I will be commenting now as Business Europe. But of course, if there are questions about the platform, if I can, I'm happy to answer any of the questions about the platform. So that being said, yeah, what I'd like to do in the 15 minutes is very much talking about both the opportunities and the challenges we see from a Business Europe perspective about the taxonomy. And I think there are a few slides, so you can move to the next one already. Oops, at least on my screen, it looks strange. So if that's the case for you as well,
for us,
yeah,
unfortunately.
I keep going, and hopefully the slides will be okay. So starting with opportunities, we think, well, as you know, the taxonomy is said has a common language, or some are talking about a dictionary between investors, issuers, project promoters, and policymakers about what are the sustainable investments meeting robust environmental standards, and this being consistent with the high-level policy commitments. And when talking about high-level commitments, policy commitments, we talk about the Green Deal objective, we talk about the climate neutrality objective by 2050, and this is where there is a good convergence between European institutions and business at large about the final objective, climate neutrality, if we talk about climate change. So I think, and we think this is really the framework in which we have to discuss the taxonomy. Now, what we do very much as Business Europe is to look at the how question, how we are going to meet this ambition, climate neutrality by 2050, while staying competitive, while being socially acceptable, looking at the technologies, those that are ready, those that where you still need investments, and so on and so forth. So all the how questions are highly relevant. And Titas mentioned this before. I mean, definitely one of the big questions about how we are getting there, it's about the investment. And Titas mentioned some of the big numbers about the need for huge investment in order to make that transition possible. And this is where we think, as Business Europe, that the taxonomy, well-designed taxonomy, can be an important asset to channel investment and private investment, because the taxonomy has been developed for private investment. So to make the private investment go into clean solutions and ongoing transition efforts, and therefore ultimately, of course, reduce the investment gap. For these reasons, when we look at the delegated act, the first delegated act with the criteria, but also when we look at the obligations or the requirements to report by companies about their taxonomy activities, we think in order to reach that objective and close the gap, close the investment gap, it's not just about, let's call the very green activities or the dark green activities. It really has to be about as well the activities that contribute to the transition to climate neutrality, if we talk about climate, but also the other environmental objectives. So this notion of transition, not only looking at the dark green activities under the taxonomy, is really key for us. And if we take an example like, well, something that I think is familiar to you, of course, the construction, the building sector, which, as you know, is covering 40% of energy consumption and a bit more than 30% of greenhouse gas emission at European level. If we look at these activities, of course, the existing stock, the existing buildings, this is useful and relevant for the long term. But we also know that what is going to make real impact and a real difference is about the already standing buildings. And of course, most of them being in place for decades to come. And I'm saying this because when we look at the first climate DA, you have criteria for the new constructions, for the new buildings, but you also have criteria for renovations, installation of different energy efficiency equipment, even on-site renewable generation, provision for energy services, and provisions about the acquisition and ownership of buildings. So they are in the first DA for the overall building and construction sector, if I may say, not only criteria for the new buildings, but also criteria that should help address, let's say, the real estate sector in its entirety. So I think talking about the taxonomy being also enabling and has an incentive to help making the transition towards an objective like climate neutrality is really key in that respect. And that is for us, and I will conclude with this in terms of opportunities, that is really for us what is really key with the taxonomy, supporting the technologies that, of course, are meeting the taxonomy criteria, but also those activities that are transitioning towards this objective. And I was trying to illustrate this with what I said before about the construction sector. I think now you have the slide on screen, which are a bit too much advancing, because I'm now coming to the challenges. So fine, no, yeah, the challenges, exactly, thanks. So yeah, I've talked firstly about the opportunities. What we see as main opportunities, and I'd like now to spend a few minutes or the rest of the intro about the challenges. And starting with challenges with the implementation of the first delegated act, being the first climate delegated act, but also the delegated act on reporting obligations. And so my first point, and this is the first one you have on the screen here, it's about, and I continue with the example of the building sector. If you look at the coverage of economic activities, we do think that the climate DA could have included more sectors. And I think the ceramic sector is, in a way, a good example, if I may say, where you have a number of NACE codes, but many of them have been forgotten in the first climate DA. I'm rather confident that the work done by the platform, the Sustainable Finance Platform, will bring and cover a higher number of sectors. And what we as Business Europe very much are calling for is on the Commission to have a system, an IT system, where basically companies and sectors can volunteer for a future inclusion under the taxonomy as an eligible sector, but also having criteria to meet the ambition. And we think that with a system like this, it will give the possibility for all the economy to have access to the green, but also to the transition finance that I was mentioning before. This system has been mentioned by the European Commission in the past. We think it has to be starting as soon as possible, sooner than later, because we all know that the preparation of the criteria is a long process that is taking time. That's the first challenge I wanted to mention. The second one is about reporting, very key. I was saying before that the taxonomy is not just a dictionary between investors, real economy, policymakers. This is also a regulation that brings reporting obligations for financial, but also for non-financial corporates. And here we have been working a lot on this as Business Europe. They are, for the non-financial sector, it's really substantial what is required to companies in terms of implementing new processes, the need for capacity, human resources to look into the review, the need for new reporting processes, new IT system. It's really substantial. And if we talk about some complex sectors, this can be equivalent to a cost of more than 7-digit or 7-digit number. This is the feedback we had. So just to give you an order of magnitude in terms of cost for some companies with belonging to very complex sector. So you have very much a cost element, which we think is important to address with the reporting obligations. You have as well a timing, a calendar issue. I think the taxonomy has set a very, very ambitious timeline for the implementation of the reporting obligation. Already by next year, companies need to report about the eligible activities. This is much easier to say than to do, especially when we talk about activities and companies that have to go through thousands of different activities. And there are many, many questions, and we see it from different feedback, different sectors, companies about question about their eligibility under the taxonomy. So we think here, and we know that the Commission is working on an FAQ to bring further clarification about the reporting obligation. It's coming in December. As Titas was saying before, this is when the first delegated act will be entering into force by the beginning of next year. December is probably already late, So this is definitely a challenge. It's late because when the DEA climate reporting are entering into force, there are still many questions that are not answered, which will not guarantee necessarily a very good quality of reports. Each company or companies could have different interpretation of the first DAs, which will bring not necessarily comparable data. And this, if you don't have the comparability in terms of data, then this is a bit missing the point about the taxonomy being a dictionary between all the relevant stakeholders. And the fact as well that the FAQ is coming in December, very close to the entry into force, this is also challenging because some companies have started to prepare. Now, if the FAQ brings different information than what the companies have been assuming so far, this could put into question some of the work they have been doing up to now. So this is very challenging. On the reporting, and I know time flies, so I'm trying to go fast. On reporting, what we are asking is basically two things. One is that the Commission issue a statement to make it clear that the first reporting year will be like a test pilot, or a pilot phase, sorry, with probably limited quality with the reports. The second ask we have to the European Commission is to have a communication channel, one-stop shop, where companies, also auditors, being more and more involved, can ask questions about the different question on the reporting obligation. So I think we think this is two things that could certainly help a wide range of companies involved very much in the reporting activities under the taxonomy. Being aware of the time, what I would like to do in the last few minutes is very much to talk about other challenges, and I'm happy to do in the Q&A about the SMEs if there are questions, because there are specificity about SMEs. But if you move to the last slide, I would like to briefly talk about other challenges that are not immediate, but are coming in the coming for the next months and possible years. This is about the possible extension of the taxonomy to significantly harmful activities or red activities, the extension to social objective, and the possible misuse of the taxonomy. Just a few words on these three things. On the extension to significantly harmful red activities, we have big concerns here because, as it was said before, the spirit of the taxonomy is to have a positive approach to incentivize investment into the sustainable activities. Introducing a significantly harmful red taxonomy will basically bring a much more positive, much more punitive approach to this exercise, and basically with the risk of not giving possibility for the companies that really need to transition to do this transformation and to access the finance they need to do the transformation. And I mean, even not talking about the higher complexity of the system if you extend to significantly harmful. On social taxonomy, which is as well something under consideration, we here as well have some concerns that it is the right instruments to regulate this under the EU taxonomy. EU competence in terms of social are different than for environmental objective, and you have a lot of difference between the national industrial relations system that needs to be taken into account. And that's why we have some strong reservations here. Very final on the misuse of the taxonomy. Here, the point I would like to make is, as I said in the beginning, the taxonomy has been designed to channel private investments into sustainable projects, sustainable activities. We see more and more links between the taxonomy and, for example, European funding instruments or sectorial legislation. And that's for us a very different purpose than what has been at the first place, the idea for the EU taxonomy. So we think it's far too early to make the link. We need to give time for the current taxonomy to demonstrate its impact. We need time to gain experience how the taxonomy works, how it's implemented, what is the impact on the market, and when we have gained sufficient experiences about the implementation of the existing taxonomy, then there is a legitimate discussion to have about making the link with public funding instruments, for instance, or making the link with European sector legislations, but not now, certainly not. I'll leave it there. I think I have been a bit too long, but I think it was important points to make. Happy to have the conversation later on. Back to you, Johannes.
Well, thank you very much, Alexandr. Yes, comprehensive as usual, and I'm sure that we'll catch up with you in the Q&A. To keep with time, I'll move straight along then to our next speaker, and that is Dr. Heimo Scheuch, who is CEO of Wienerberger. Wienerberger is a leading provider of building material and infrastructure solutions. Dr. Scheuch has degrees in law and economics and began his professional career in corporate finance, so well placed. His focus now is on ESG, digitalization, innovation and growth of the company. Dr. Scheuch, please.
Thank you, Johannes, and a warm welcome from my side, and thank you for having me on the panel. Johannes, you allow me a philosophical statement before I start. I'm 26 years in this industry, and I've seen a lot. I've seen sustainability coming, I've seen ETS coming, I've seen a lot of consultants coming, and they've all told us how to do things. And now we have some strange animal called taxonomy. I was listening to the speaker before me to make it positive. The name taxonomy doesn't sound very positive to me, by the way. But what we should keep in mind, all of us, and especially my dearest friends at the Commission and my dearest friends in Parliament, please keep some common sense. Common sense, why? Sustainability comes from forestry and agriculture. Pass on your land from one generation to the other. For hundreds of years we did that. Well, then came consultants, pesticides, how to extract water from the ground, make it more efficient. And suddenly we lost all of that because nobody was believing it is the right thing to do. At the end of the day, we make rules and regulations, rules and regulations, rules and regulations. And then as a small farmer, you hire 2 consultants to run your farm. It's not possible. And I think it's the same for all of us. We are stuck with a lot of things. We don't know what to do. We deal with all sorts of new things every other day, but we lose the common sense. And I say this because I think our industry has accomplished a lot. The ceramic industry from 2000 to now has reduced by 45% its emission. And that's a great job, right? That's a great job. And we are ready to commit to the Green Deal. We are ready to do our utmost to achieve it. But we need a set of clear rules and regulations, not something that changes every other year. And I think this is very important. Our investment cycles are long. We are ready to commit. We are ready to sort of put a lot of effort in it, but we need clear rules. And this is actually when we talk about today's subject, how we can finance it. I hope I can shift these things, but it got stuck, I think. Would be nice if I could, but now it's gone anyway. But darkness. That's probably what everybody thinks about the economy. So it's great, actually. But when you look at this subject, and I told you, here we are. Thank you very much. And we need, obviously, that the sector as such, we are a very, very fragmented sector. We employ more than 200,000 people in the EU, and a lot more indirectly. So we need to keep those people because they are out there in the countryside, in remote areas, and we need the jobs there. We create also not only jobs for people who work with us, but jobs who actually install our products or in other industries. So there's a lot of indirect contribution that we make. And we create, take for example refractories. We make a great contribution for other industries to save energy again. So again here, a lot of contribution to other performances. By the way, a company like ours that I run now for quite a while, we have more than 200 production sites. But with those, we emit less than 25% of the emission, of the yearly emission of the Austrian steel mill, for example. So you see the context, what we are talking here about. It's actually quite fascinating if you look into the details. And the clear set of rules for our sector must be that we all have the same rules and regulations, because otherwise you have distortion. Yeah? And I see this coming on another subject, on the CO2 emissions, when we look from country to country on taxation now and how we allocate these free allowances. I think Europe needs to be careful to not create within the common market a distortion of competition. When we look at our industry, and again, I hope I can, oh, it goes the wrong way, I'm sorry. Now I'm going in the right way. Oh, sorry, it takes a little while, probably it's not that. I just wanted to show in this chart that we, and I will go the other way because it's easier for me here. Hopefully it doesn't hang up, it hangs up. So I just wanted to say, when you talk about industrial processes, you need energy. Any transformation requires energy. What we need is access to sustainable, available energy resources. So Europe and the policymakers need to come together and say, this is our energy resources of the future. Yeah? Because otherwise we cannot plan. You can't just say electricity comes out here of the wall, like probably 80% of the population thinks in Europe. But this is not the case. Yeah? And what are our sustainable resources? And industry, and as I said, remote areas where we produce, we need infrastructure to get it there. Today, all of our infrastructure is based on installed and for 50, 60 years already installed infrastructure. Now to change it is very costly. And who is going to finance it? Question mark. So when we talk about this transition process, it's a transition process not only in energy, but also in infrastructure. And this is very important. We need partnership in research and development in order to develop new energy resources on the one side, but also in technology, how we produce. And these are long-term things that we need to implement and to focus on. So today to talk about hydrogen is very nice, but it's not available. And is it going to be available in 10 years? Who knows? We can obviously dream and make plans, etc. But we in industry need to plan on realistic terms, and this is something we actually need to focus on when we take decisions. And when we take also decisions on R&D, and we are ready to implement a lot of it and put a lot of focus on the R&D side, but we need partnerships with centers, and money needs to be devoted here as well. So it's money well spent. And by the way, in this sector, we have a lot of world-leading companies. So technology and production is still in Europe and creating jobs and wealth. So this is, I think, important, even if some people in policy making and in other parts of our decision-making process don't want to hear it. It's very important that we have jobs in Europe in industry. Financing plays an important role, but let me say I'm running a public company, 100% free float, 60% Anglo-Saxon shareholders. They have already certain sets of rules and regulation when it comes to ESG. They determine today where they are going to invest. So why not listen to what they have to say? Not always the European, the continental European approach, rules and regulations. They have already decided. They already do it, they implement it. So again, I think from our perspective to say, yes, taxonomy is nice, fine, we will have it, we will do our work, we will do the whole administration, but on the other side, the financial investor community worldwide is still an Anglo-Saxon community with their own rules and regulations. And Europe needs to be once aware that we have no financial center in the EU. We have it in London, and it will remain there, because even if our French friends think that it's going to be Paris and our German friends think it's going to be Frankfurt, it's not. I'm sorry to say. But it's a clear statement from my side, from experience, yeah, where decisions are taken and where obviously it's very important money allocations are made. Actually, somebody of the European Commission should probably look at where European bonds are emitted and where the most buyers are in London. Yeah? So actually, when you look obviously at the complexity of it, it's important for all of us, small, medium-sized and bigger companies, because we are getting confronted on this issue, and you call it now taxonomy, fine with me, on all areas, from insurance to short-term, long-term financing, and obviously managing your stakeholders. Yeah? And this is we need to do it together, and as a sector, we need to communicate clearly what criteria we want, because it's us who need to determine it together with the administration. But we need to be listened to. That's very important, because otherwise we get imposed on certain things that they are not feasible. And again, the current situation is also one that is, I think, dear colleagues, rather complex, because we have certain products that are already in, and our processes are not in. So again, here it's a tricky situation, because we get confronted with a lot of burden on our products already, but on our manufacturing processes not yet. So again, here I think we need to clarify also to make the rules that we are imposed on when it comes to the products less complicated and less burdensome for us than if we were all together in the whole taxonomy. For a company as ours, it's not that complex, because we are very transparent. We need to, for now 15 years, we do sustainability reports. We do a lot of sort of reporting. For small and mid-sized, it's much more complex. I understand and I appreciate that. And we need to be careful that it doesn't become too complex for everybody. And I think here, in order to have your strategic plan laid out, again, I think we need to learn and educate ourselves in the sector. It's feasible, we'll manage it, but it's going to be an additional administrative burden. And my colleague earlier said cost is a big issue. It's a big issue when everything starts to be very margin-wise a little difficult when you take the energy hike in prices in the last couple of months for a lot of us in the industry. So again, I think from a perspective of management, feasible, complex, and burdensome on the cost side. Let me just summarize at the end of my short statement. Our requirement that we have, or what we would like to see, is that the comparability in the sector, within the sector, has to be there. We need to have clear rules and regulations for all installations in our market. We need a status of enabling activities that is today still a little bit unclear for our products. We need to clarify this, and then obviously when it comes to the fact that we are integrated in taxonomy to the performance activities, the new mandatory reporting process is, I would say, for a lot of us, 80% from small and medium-sized, too complex. And again, I come back to my initial statement. Common sense, please, common sense, not things that are out of proportion. There's always a common sense and some rule, 80-20%, yeah? 80, with 80 things you can, or 20 things you can reach the 80% if you do them well. And reporting preparation time for the companies are very short. I think we need to keep this in mind. We need to enlarge a little bit here. And when obviously here we get involved in it, we need to be part of this discussion very quickly. And we need to have here a clear set of requirements that we can communicate. And again, from our thing, you know, we might be considered an industry that has a demand to energy. But compared to others like cement or steel, we are not such high consumers of energy, to be honest. So at the end of the day, we have done a lot, we have achieved a lot, we are 100% committed to the carbon-free economy. We contribute already through our products a lot of positive aspects to a carbon-free world, and we'll continue to do so. But we need here a fair amount of financing, long-term financing that goes into these projects, because we need obviously to finance this change and transition, and keep this obviously under the aspect of clear performance criteria. Yeah. And this is, I think, from my side, a plea again from industry that is not in our member countries in the EU, can sort of tell you hundreds of stories that we are not listened to today, and that we are obviously, we would like and require to be listened more also on a European level as industry. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Scheuch. Indeed, many very clear statements in your intervention, and only one of them being, yes, please, could someone be listening to you? And I'm sure you're not the only person who feels that way sometimes. Now, I understand that the next step is to wake you all up a little more and to go to a poll on the Slido. So perhaps if we can flash up the QR code again, there should be a couple of questions waiting for you there on the Slido, so that we can start to see how these interventions have influenced you. And then perhaps while we're waiting for the responses, I might ask a few questions of the panelists. I'm not sure if we still have Titas online, do we? But while we're waiting for that, perhaps Alexandr, I think you've heard a couple of things from this last intervention that resonate with your own, have you not? You, I think, laid out pretty clearly some things that Business Europe would be looking for in order to assist the Commission. Where do you think, though, that the greatest opportunities could lie for an industrial sector like ceramics? There is this sort of ambiguity about to what extent a sector's products are listed, visible in the criteria that have been published so far, and yet they may not find exactly their activity for producing that product in the taxonomy. I think you mentioned that aspect in your talk as well. Could you go into that a little more? Do you have some advice about how we should decipher the criteria that have been published, the split between perhaps end products and activities?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, this is not. Can you hear me well?
That's better. Thank you.
So I'm happy to try. This is not the easiest question, Johannes, also because the framework and the technicalities around this are not 100% clear. But I try before just to just echo some of the comments just before. I think and this is what I've tried to express in my introduction, if the taxonomy achieve the setup of a good common language between investors, real economy, European-wide, without adding or bringing unnecessary and too much bureaucracy, complexity, and cost, I think it can be a useful instrument. But there are a number of if and strong conditions, and I have tried to highlight what the if and conditions are. But if they are met, we think that there is a potential for the instrument, knowing the challenges that it brings. I wanted to restate this very clearly from my perspective. I think on your point, Johannes, it's so just to be clear, general comment. I think the opportunities will be about the stronger mobilization of private investment into the activities that meet the ambition of the taxonomy. I think, as I said, where there is not enough clarity and need for more work by all the community, and I think that the Sustainable Finance Platform hopefully should help here, is around the enabling activities and how they can be fully recognized under the taxonomy. I think this is where, not knowing all the details here, but this is where the potential of the taxonomy has not been yet fully exploited and needs to be there. And we see a number of questions actually by different companies which needs to make the first reporting next year about eligibility. So what if a company use taxonomy eligible material, but what if the material they are using, and which is taxonomy eligible, is not or does not lead to taxonomy eligible sales, for instance? How are you going to account this internal, if I may say, taxonomy eligible activities? This is just an example of the questions that come to us, and we bring this as well to the Commission and to the Sustainable Finance. So I'm not answering very precise, and I know this on your question, Johannes. I recognize the challenge, and I recognize the need to have a stronger conversation around this to avoid or to really bring the full potential of the taxonomy with regard to enabling activities.
Was a helpful answer, because I think you drew the link with the definition of an enabling activity, and indeed I would agree with that. So when you see your products listed in the taxonomy, your natural thought might be, well, that can't happen without my activity. So where is my activity? I'd like perhaps to turn to Titas then for the next question. Titas, you're placed at DG Grow, and we've heard from Alexandr some things that what Business Europe would be looking for or requesting to enable sustainable finance to be taken up. I wondered if you might have any needs. What would you be seeking from a sector like perhaps the ceramics sector to ensure that European industry can benefit from sustainable finance?
Taxonomy sets very, very high standards, which is basically shows you the direction of travel. So the value of that is, well, it's on one side, it's sometimes very challenging, because if you look at some of the criteria, but maybe for ceramic sector, it's harder to see it because it doesn't cover directly. But if you talk to industries that are covered, you'll find that it says it's impossible to produce using criteria right now because it's just economically impossible. You need to use renewable energy as a steel producer and things like that. So, you know, costs would be exorbitant. And while we don't have markets for greener products, dedicated markets where you're able to sort of send the cost or extra cost of meeting these requirements to downstream customers or final customers at the end of the day, you really would be struggling. So by showing, but at the same time, there is a major value, knowing that, you know, investment cycles for energy intensive industries and ceramics we're not talking about 1-2 years time. We really need to know where we go in order to plan for it and to make investments that we, you know, will not be obsolete in a couple of years time. So taxonomy is really good for that because it really sets you the direction of where we are going, and we can understand in the cases where, you know, we're still not there completely, either because technology is not available in order to produce in completely climate neutral way things. We know we're going to go even further at some point, but at least they set you where is the direction of travel, and in some cases, you know, it's already, you know, how 2050 world would look for certain activities. So that combined, you know, with seeing also for sector like ceramics, what is happening to you know, around based on requirements for buildings, etc., etc., etc. You can have a sort of a map. What is the future? What regulation is going for? Because and that's one of the challenges of taxonomy, because the requirements here that you can find in are going beyond current regulation, and it's a tough one, because by going so far, you know, we're going really beyond, you know, what we're used to, what we consider acceptable, and so on and so on. But at the same time, it has, so there is the danger of choosing something wrong, but at the same time, it's a major value of indicating what is the direction of travel.
Thank you, Titas. So if I might take the prerogative to summarize, I think what you're saying is you would appreciate a healthy slice of patience, but also some regular work in the direction of travel. Dr. Schorsch, I have many questions for you, but I wonder if I could beg on your patience, because I would like to give some time to the floor, and we are running out of time. So if anyone would have a question from the floor for any of our panelists, please raise your hand. I think there's a microphone coming. Otherwise, we could go straight to the poll results. No questions from the floor? Are they all in the Slido? Here we have one.
Yeah, thank you so much. Antonia Grieche-Radmeier from Wienerberger. I'm interested in knowing more about EU Sustainable Finance Platform's work and about the next steps coming from the platform. Thank you. It's for Alexandra.
I'm sorry?
The question is goes to Alexandra.
Goes to Alexandra?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I am not hearing well. Alexandra, the ways of working of the platform, next steps, what to expect?
Thanks for the question. There are a number of next steps. So the most short-term next step will be about publishing a report on the extension of taxonomy to social. I was commenting on this before. Then there will be a report by the platform on the extension of the taxonomy to significantly harmful and red categories. And of course, there will be, and that's the very substantial work. I mean, the others are as well, but there is a very substantial work about a proposal for criteria on the 4 other environmental objectives: circular economy, water, biodiversity, and pollution. And so the platform, as you know, is working on this, and and will be publishing its final recommendation at some stage. I mean, the timeline is not yet grave in stone, so it's difficult for me to give a precise answer on the timeline for this report. But this is of course a big piece, but that is coming by the platform. So I think they are the three main next steps.
Good, thank you. So I hope that was clear. Perhaps we'll go to poll results now and see what the audience thought about those questions. So to the question, are you well informed? A resounding no, but I suppose you answered this before the panel was completed, right? Shall we launch the second question for the poll? Hopefully you're much better informed already. The second question has come up now, so please do punch in your answers to that, and then I might steal a few minutes with Dr. Scheuch. So, Dr. Scheuch, I hope I'm not stealing thunder in referring to the fact that Ceramica will be releasing a roadmap tomorrow. And I think I heard from Titas's last comments that perhaps a roadmap is what's required. We have the direction of travel, some of the pieces aren't ready yet, so we need a roadmap. So my question to you would be, how do you think sustainable finance can support your decarbonisation that will be announced tomorrow?
Gives our stakeholders a picture of our industry and what we want to achieve. So that's very important indeed. On the financing side, and I was surprised by the poll results, but let me hope to clarify a little bit. I think when we look at the financing, you need to distinguish between the equity financing and the equity markets, meaning the public stock markets, and the private ones, meaning the private equity or other money coming privately into equity. Both are already confronted with a lot of pressure on them with respect to ESG. It's not taxonomy, but it's ESG. And the fastest growing international investment funds are the green funds, the ESG funds right now. So basically they are already, the financial market is moving, and that's why I refer to the Anglo-Saxon one, much quicker than the continental one. Yeah? And therefore it is important to keep this in mind when you finance industry, because industry is financed a lot also by equity, private or public. Yeah? So to explain myself here, and we need to keep an eye on, and I think all my friends in the Commission need to keep an eye on, because if we lag behind and with our rules and regulations, then the market moves and we stay behind just with a set of rules again. Yeah? So that's my first answer. The second one is when you talk about bond financing, and this bond financing is more interesting also for smaller, mid-sized companies and bigger companies as well. Green bonds are already out there for quite some time. We have seen good experience, and I think also mid-sized companies have seen good experience with green bonds linked to certain obligations that the company undertakes in, for example, reducing CO2 emissions, but not only. Biodiversity could be one. Circular economy could be one. So there are other criteria. So we have this already. It's I would say it's a partnership approach between the financing institution and the company in order to make clear commitments. And these commitments are already out there. Yeah? You can now say by law we have certain commitments, fine, but you will always have a contract, because a bond is nothing else than an agreement between a couple of parties where they set clear rules for the 10-year term, 8-year term, 7-year term, whatsoever. So I think this is important. The over-regulation on the financial institutions that we currently face in Europe make it very complicated for them to do that. But they get forced anyway by the state, by governments to give out more green bonds. But it's from a mid to small sized, a little bit complicated way of financing for these companies. Now I come to the third one, that means the local banks, because a lot of companies are local and small sized, and therefore they finance themselves with local banks, and they are lagging behind. So for the moment it was still quite easy to finance the working capital needs or the small investment needs with these local credits or facilities with banks. When they now change, and everybody is frightened, I tell you from what I hear now from the marketplace, that every banker is now frightened with taxonomy, and a lot of consultants run around and tell them what to do, this will have a major impact. Because when you show up with your request, I need to finance 4 million euros in my factory, because here I can make these improvements, and then the complication starts. Yeah? And this will be then the tricky thing if the company gets the money from the bank, and if it meets all the standards, regulations that are imposed on it. Yeah? So this, I think, from my perspective, to keep here the set of rules simple and straightforward is the key element, because otherwise you make a very strange decision on the financing side, because you dry up the market for money-wise, and they don't get access to money. Yeah? And you kill an industry, to be honest. And this is, I think, what I was trying to alert everybody to: be careful what you are doing. Yeah?
Thank you. Thank you, very good. Clear statements again. While our colleagues are bringing up the quick-fire results of the second poll question, and we're already 1 minute over time, just while they're doing that, I'd like a follow-up question. So it sounds to me like the EU often would like to be seen to lead in these areas, and I think I'm hearing from you a cautionary message to pay a little more attention to what others are doing in this space, and perhaps look for alignment. What's the balance there between leading and aligning?
I would rather see a Europe today that is more leading in certain areas, and in other areas to also look and listen to what others have to say. Yeah? You don't have to start from scratch when others have already certain experience, and to listen carefully what they have and then align yourself. Yeah? Financial market-wise, we are not leading. We have never been leading. Yeah? And this is, I think we need to accept it. And therefore, align ourselves much quicker to get access to capital, to equity and to financing. That's very important for us as industry. However, and now I come to my critical point, in industry, we have always been leading. Always. And we are always very creative and very innovative when it comes to improve our industrial production or standards when we are under pressure. In Europe, high costs, very difficult access to energy, very complex administration. I tell you how complex it is, administration in Europe, yeah, to deal with it. But we survive. And therefore we can lead. But we need to lead with really determination. Yeah? Otherwise we have a problem. And here again, I think these two things, what you correctly pointed out, Johannes, alignment on the financial side and leading on the industrial side would be the way forward for Europe.
Perfect answer from my point of view. And we are running out of time, so perhaps if the poll results are ready, we might have a ta-da-ta-da-ta-da fanfare. And on this question, for which kind of investment is sustainable finance essential? Also a very clear winner. Investment in the process. So decarbonisation, resource efficiency, environmental protection, and I guess that does link in with what we've just heard from Dr. Scheuch. You know, lead where we know how to lead, where industry has led in the past. And I do hope that in the years to come, you will have an opportunity to be heard by the Commission and by the platform in making sure that your activities are covered well in the taxonomy. So, I think we're at the end of our panel. I would like to thank very much the speakers, both in place and remote. You've dealt admirably with the technical issues and the time constraints, and for me it's been a very rich discussion. I have sympathy for the floor. It's a very wonky subject. I hope it's whet your appetites, and I hope that you will tackle the panelists, Dr. Scheuch in particular, at events later today for more information. It's been a pleasure for me. Thank you very much, and I'll draw this panel to a close. Thank you.